right, Drew. So to give everyone some context, we've probably all used Dropbox, but here's where the company is today. Over 700 million registered users worldwide, 18 million paying customers. The company is profitable, which is a very rare thing, I feel like, around here, and generates $2.5 billion in annual revenue, with like a B. Over $800 million in free cash flow. You have nearly $1 billion in cash, and employ over 2,200 people globally. Wow, thank you for being here.
It's great to be here.
All right, so I know the lore of Dropbox. I'm sure we've all heard it. You know, when you got the company started, you forgot your thumb drive, you were on the bus to New York, you're like, screw it, I'm just gonna fix this problem. And that product was born that really took over kind of early consumerization of productivity tools. Mm-hmm. You know, it was something that grew virally. I think this was back in the era when we called it freemium, before PLG. Eventually, Dropbox jumped to the enterprise. And since we're at the Enterprise Ready Conference, that's where I wanted to start. When was it in the company's life cycle that you started kind of getting serious about enterprise? You saw the value of that, and you were like, wait, I actually think we can turn this, you know, roaring business with consumers into something for businesses.
Sure. Well, first, great to be here, and great to see you. I mean, Dropbox started getting adopted in businesses basically from day one. And before we were really serious about it, I mean, we would pay attention to things like our support email address, or get, like, frankly, like fan mail from people using Dropbox for all kinds of different things. And we understood the personal use cases, but we'd also get emails from people saying they're like, oh, we're a bunch of like farmers coordinating somehow like tractors on our field, and we're like, how the hell does Dropbox help you with that? Or people like in Africa, like using Dropbox to for like anti-poaching, like to track down, to map things out, and as you'd imagine, like there's like intermittent Wi-Fi, but Dropbox was able to like keep working. So sort of this interesting infrastructure that Dropbox was being repurposed for, or like astronomers finding new planets on different continents, and then much more like ordinary, like people just using Dropbox in small companies, big companies. So, and part of that was because we had this whole viral motion and sharing, where our first growth vector was a little different, actually. Like we had this like referral program where I tell you about Dropbox, we both get some free space, we sort of gamify that process. But the second big growth lever that really worked and scaled was sharing. So if I start using Dropbox at home, I can also bring it into work, and then if I start using it on a project with a few other coworkers, you know, pretty soon a team becomes a department, becomes a wall-to-wall deployment. So practically speaking, the first complaints we got were like, hey, we're trying to buy more licenses, and it's super annoying to have to use like find a bunch of different like credit cards to like sign up each user one at a time. Can you even, like, our first like enterprise product, it was really just like, or we called it Dropbox for Teams, was just like shared billing. So we had very like baby steps on our way to, I mean, first it was like shared billing, and then it was some of the stuff that would be more familiar around visibility and control for IT, basically. And so we found that self-serve kind of hit a ceiling as you reached a certain level of adoption where IT would get involved, and they would either say like, you know, give us the version of this we can buy, or we're going to kick you out, because there was this whole like shadow IT and consumerization of IT happening. But so I think there's a sort of there's just a groundswell of natural adoption in businesses based on these like viral motions. And then there was actually kind of a holy war inside of Dropbox around our identity. Like, we started out more as sort of consumer-minded people, a very young team who had never really worked in other companies before, and didn't really have a lot of context around what, you know, enterprise software was. And so actually there's a surprising amount of conflict over, should we build more like consumer-oriented features around photo sharing and things like that, and yet we also had this groundswell of use in businesses, and but at the same time, the way that conventional enterprise software worked was kind of this, you know, or like the companies that were like good at enterprise software selling often had kind of like dark patterns of like locking people into these really like opaque contracts and selling a bunch of stuff that doesn't exist. And so there's a lot of queasiness over like, would we, and you know, we would interview execs who were like good at that. And I think that's like an unfair caricature, but I'd say, yeah, there was one of the biggest early hurdles was just like, should we go after this?
Was there a moment when you really just committed to it, or did you kind of tiptoe into it? How did that evolution?
Yeah,
how did that evolution happen? Because I think a lot of people are kind of in that state right now, or trying to think about that.
Well, I think we certainly did commit to it, and I mean, my argument was like, look, we want people to use Dropbox, and we're not actually providing a good product experience if people are like blocked from using Dropbox by their IT admin. And sure, we might have these like pictures of what could, or sure, we have these like complaints about some of the patterns in enterprise software around the customer relationship or around the UX of these products not being good and not wanting to emulate that. But like, we have a real opportunity to do this differently. Like, we can land in these companies really cheaply, and maybe there's a way we can figure out how to like continue to hold a really high bar for UX and all the things we care about, but also reach the business audience who are like some of our happiest customers. Like, this is like a very mission critical thing for the companies and people that are using Dropbox at work. And IT admins are not being unreasonable when they're just like, look, we want to deploy this software in our company. Actually, it's already deployed because people have just brought it in bottoms up. But just give us a basic like security and visibility and the tools we need to manage it effectively. So, and then as we were scaling the company and we got more like business-minded people in, this was like a more obvious thing for us to go do.
I feel like Dropbox is like the textbook case of PLG now. And I think years ago, I literally remember reading like an HBS case study where it dialed in on the company as the fastest to reach $1 billion run rate, and kind of powered by the users being the salespeople. I'm curious what lessons you can share about converting that grassroots growth into enterprise success. Was it use cases that were bringing it in? Was it just like the signups and then you would convert it? What was the motion there as you went after the kind of true enterprise? Not necessarily the people running their tractors, but
sure,
maybe the people building tractors.
No, totally. Well, first was just how we got that, how we scaled to begin with. I mean, we didn't really know in advance how Dropbox was going to reach people, and we'd had kind of we'd use all these like unusual tactics to get our first like 100,000 users. Like, we had this closed beta for like over a year. So we really we did not like move fast and break things because we were just worried that our reputation really first of all, people are putting their most important stuff in Dropbox, and so we had to be really careful with their information. That's a big responsibility. So reliability, security, all those things. So we actually had a pretty long path even just to make Dropbox like publicly available. And then once we launched publicly, we had a bit of a growth spurt where we sort of worked our way. We let all the people in the waiting list off. But then I remember at that time we also raised a new round of venture funding from Sequoia, and I was just having breakfast with one of our investors, and he's like, "Cool, we're at like 200,000 users now. Like, when do you think we can get to 500,000? And I like wasn't thinking. It was like a 7 or 8 a.m. meeting, which like was totally incompatible with our lifestyle at the time. And I was like, I don't know, by the end of the year. And I was like, oh shit, what have I done? And I'm like, how are we gonna? And he was like, great, okay, that sounds awesome. And then we like took it quite literally. I like went home, and I'm like, or went back to I guess it was our home and office with my co-founder and me. And I'm like, we better start modeling out like how we're going to grow this fast. Maybe because like people weren't searching for something like Dropbox. It's sort of the kind of thing you only know you need after you have it. And I think this is important because it actually like matters with how you grow. But the positive side is that once you have it, it was like so delightful or so positively surprising that it was sort of in that category of product that you would like spread by word of mouth. And so that like fueled this. That was the beginning of this like viral loop. But we weren't even thinking about viral loops at the time. We're like, all right, well, we did all these like videos like on Hacker News or on Dig and Reddit. That's how we got our first kind of 100,000 signups. But we couldn't keep doing that forever. that was going to cap out. And they were like, okay, we're like a big grown-up company now that has raised millions of venture dollars. I guess we should do like traditional PR and marketing, and like that didn't work. Or it didn't move the needle on the numbers at all. And they were like, I don't know, maybe it's like antivirus. Like no one was looking for that, but like it comes pre-installed on every computer. So like maybe that's how we should. So maybe these distribution partnerships are going to be the way we reach people. And like that just wasted a bunch of time because we had like no leverage. And the people wanted us to white label things and so on. So, but what really worked were these like, what was truly scalable were like these referral programs that where, one person would tell 3 people, and then each of those 3 people would tell 3 people or whatever, and the classic viral growth. And meanwhile, I started the company back in 2007, and we were trying to figure out how to grow it in 2008, 2009. This was also like the heyday of like the Facebook platform and social media really taking off. And the underpinnings of that, or like that, our industry was really figuring out for the first time viral growth, which actually comes from epidemiology, which is really about like, R naught and things like that, like coughing on people, how many people do you infect, and conversion rates, and also perfectly maps to consumer software, consumer internet software, like draw your own conclusions. But so we really studied the mechanics of that, of like, okay, well, how do we create these viral loops where basically, the growth funnels, like you have signups, then you need to activate a lot of them, so they have to have successful onboarding, and then they become an active user, and then active users then have to go like share, who then expose in that sharing process. If you share a folder or a link with 3 people, then 3 new people get exposed, and they enter the top of the funnel, and that's the loop. And then you look at the conversion rates across each of those, and it's this game of inches where primarily played in Excel, where you're like trying to figure out what you can do to grind up that viral coefficient, but it's an exponential, so it has this massive effect. And so this is just like the important precursor to how we ended up in businesses, because then once we really got that working, things like our onboarding success rate was very low. It was like in the 20%, 25% of signups would download Dropbox and then actually put a file in and finish installing the app. And now there's things like user testing, or there's lots of UX research tools and even AI versions of this now. But our version of this was like literally going on Craigslist and paying people $50 to come to the office and like watching them go through that experience, and seeing that they had like 80 things we wrote down that were all these rough edges in that process where they got confused or failed to finish downloading or installing the app or couldn't understand or didn't get the right mental model of Dropbox and kind of churned. And we took, then we fixed those 80 things, and our onboarding success rate went from like 25 to 65%. And then we did similar optimizations and analytics against our sharing flows. And just by taking the friction out, suddenly we got to this place where we sort of had like linear growth to suddenly, we were just like 10xing every year, going from like 1 million users to 10 million users to 100 million registered users and onward. And then along the way, we just ended up parachuting into all these businesses. And then from there, it was really just about enablement. I mean, I sort of talked about the general progression. Like first, we just like handled shared billing, and just like people would ask for stuff that was kind of obvious, and we would implement it, and it worked. And then but to really solve this properly, actually, we had to like build from scratch a lot of what you guys do out of the box. Things like audit logs and authentication and SSO, and like this long list of enterprise requirements that every SaaS company has to do. Like we had to sort of figure out our own implementation of all of those things. But yeah, it was very much this inversion of the sort of normal software model. I mean, to the sort of conventional way that software makes it into companies is that it's basically top down. You like sell to an IT admin or a business buyer or some combination. They then like pay for it and deploy it, and then we sort of inverted that. We're like, Dropbox already deployed in the company, so actually like de-risks a lot for IT. You get to skip past a lot of the procurement and sort of proof of value and advanced conversations. They just want to like wrap their arms around it and control it. And so it's like deployed first, and then they like purchase it. And so we sort of flipped the model on its head, and I think we even like recognize that more in hindsight than at the time.
It sounds like a good place to have leverage too at that point, when they're already using it. you don't really have to sell it in that tradition.
Yeah.
No steak dinners and golf games. And,
Yeah, no, it's very efficient. And, even to this day, I think we have, kind of half the typical spend on sales and marketing as a percent of revenue. So that's the magic of these viral models, is like they're zero cost customer acquisition, basically because they're like based on these trusted referrals. These aren't just random sharing activities. It's like people sharing Dropbox with the people that they work most closely with. And like to this day is like our, the single lever I think about the most.
And I guess in addition to all these business customers, you still have that roaring consumer, kind of prosumer business fueling the company. So you got kind of a bonus, both of them. Mm-hmm. All right, so let's fast forward to today. I guess a few years ago, in 2018, you and Arash, you wrote a letter to shareholders that I found, and you wrote, "Over time, machine intelligence will allow Dropbox to better understand and serve our users." In 2018.
Yeah.
That was years ago. You've been thinking about this, thinking about ways to bring machine intelligence, now AI, to Dropbox. What are you guys working on today?
Yeah, and that's still what we're working on. In 2019, some of our launches, we previewed a lot of this stuff. But in short, I started Dropbox because I kept forgetting my thumb drive. But really, the bigger question is like, why is it so difficult to find and organize and share my most important information? And in the beginning, my most important information was my files, and the scattering was across different devices and operating systems that didn't talk to each other, and the solution looked like syncing all the files to the cloud, and the product very quickly took on a life of its own. But fast forwarding to today, we're kind of back to the same set of problems, even before AI. But in the modern environment, what used to be 100 tabs, 100 files on your desktop is now like 100 tabs in your browser, right? Our stuff is scattered out across every possible ecosystem, and it's just like all of the, despite, we adopt these tools for good reason because they give us these new superpowers, like all these different purpose-built SaaS applications. But when you look at the whole system, there are like these regressions there's problems hidden in plain sight with the overall UX. So for example, search, right? At home, I can just Google something and search all of human knowledge from one box. And then I go to work, and we all go to work, and we have 10 search boxes that each search 10% of your stuff, and then you run a couple searches manually, and then you give up and Slack someone else to find it for you, and and that's how we do it. And we're the frogs in the boiling water. We don't even notice that anymore. But you sort of step back, and you're like, why would we ever do it like this? And it's not just search. Even just like how we organize and share information. Like, what does it even mean to organize something when the something is like a Google Doc over here and a 10 gig 4K video in Dropbox and an Airtable link? Like, there's no common container for that. For like mixed format content, and which is weird because like files have folders, songs have playlists, links have, right? So we search for these sort of problems hidden in plain sight like that. And a lot of what Dropbox is doing now is basically solving these problems for today's era, including search, including organizing and sharing content, but most importantly, AI. And so what's interesting to me is a couple things, like all that stuff I said about having 100 tabs open and your stuff being scattered in a million places. Like, how much has AI helped with that? Like, zero or negative, right? It's like another set of tabs you have open. It is another place where context kind of gets lost and goes to die. And then, writ large, zooming way out, you're like, our industry is spending like trillions of dollars on like winning making the models win another math Olympiad and like increasing the IQ a few points. And yet there's this other obvious bottleneck, which is the models are only as smart as the context you provide them. And so similar to how we kind of took this concept of the cloud that was kind of inaccessible for normal people, and we brought it down to earth, and we gave you like a folder that syncs and gave you all the benefits of it without even having to know what it is. For a lot of our customers, we're trying to do the same thing with AI. Like, the big bottleneck is your AI knows nothing about you. Like, every chat conversation starts from scratch. You're like hauling in documents or context one at a time, or cutting and pasting. This is like a medieval way of doing it. And so we have a new product called Dropbox Dash, which aims to solve that. So on the surface, it's an AI assistant and a search engine, but it's like within your company. But it connects to all your different work apps across every ecosystem. So it'll connect to your Google Drive and your email and your Dropbox. You actually don't even need files on Dropbox. and Slack and everything in one place. And then from that point, you get a lot of benefits for that. So you can do universal search and get that one search box that can search everything. And then you can interact with your stuff in natural language. So ChatGPT is great if you're like, explain to me quantum physics, and I use it for things like that. And a lot more boring and dumb things, but but at work, like it is super valuable to be able to say like, for all the questions that ChatGPT can answer, like if you ask like, how's our launch going, or how's my week look, these tools like have no context, literally, and or just can't help you with those whole categories of questions. And so we see a big opportunity for Dropbox to be this like platform agnostic, trusted way to connect to all of your different apps and like close that context gap to actually make AI useful at work. Because then, on the other side of things, you're like, well, why are 95% of enterprise AI pilots failing? Like, why is AI not having more of an impact at work? It's like, well, turns out, step one was like, let's just try to give everybody ChatGPT at work and call it a day. But actually, the real bottleneck is the lack of context. And so we see a big opportunity to solve that.
It seems like you really have your finger on the pulse of what's been changing in the AI world. And when we were just catching up backstage, I was jealous of your NVIDIA Blackwell cluster you got. I think it's pretty rare for a CEO, especially one that's been running a company for so long, to actually still have their hands on building stuff. And I've been following your tweets that you taught yourself machine learning. You've been building stuff. Talk about that and like how it's informed, this focus on taking Dropbox into this AI era of software.
Yeah, I mean, when I was a little kid, I was like basically born an engineer. Like I was lucky. My parents had like a PC Junior in the living room when I was 3 years old, and I probably wrote my first line of code when I was 5. So I had like a pretty early head start on all this, and I love it. And then I was like, all right, I fell in love with like coding and engineering. Then I'm like, I want to be a founder and build things. But then, and then I eventually became like CEO of this like organization, or I was sort of founder CEO, but sort of really became like running a large organization, which is a whole different thing. But I think I think a couple things. One is I'm always like I'm a very frustration-driven entrepreneur. So like I get really annoyed about something with technology not working the way I think it should, and then like wanting to fix it permanently. So like forgetting the thumb drive and Dropbox was born that way. But there have been many other frustrations along the way, and so the motivation for learning AI was really as I inhabited like the CEO role of like really managing a lot of people, and I was baffled by how much manual labor there is as an executive in doing like very basic things like triaging your email or figuring out where your time goes. And I'm like, man, I need to write like scripts and use some like I should really like properly learn machine learning to go like automate some of the more tedious aspects of my job. And so that's what I did, like all the kind of good old-fashioned AI, like learning about regression and classification and like old school NLP. And like those techniques are actually really powerful and compute efficient, but they would fall apart whenever you touch text, like the malformed English that we all speak. Like just computers couldn't really parse natural language. And so there was this sort of like backlog of all the stuff I wanted to build, even 10 years ago, that was just like infeasible because the technology wasn't there yet. And then, LLMs were kind of this like thunderclap of like 10 innovations in one, where, before a large language model, you go for maybe sometimes a Python library you would download could sort of identify the part of speech of a word in a sentence, to then suddenly like after Gen AI, like, these language models could like write a JavaScript file and then write a sonnet about it, and it was just like, wow, that was like a lot for one singular innovation. And so along the way, I would just continue to be trying to automate stuff. I made a little personal search engine because I was curious about how some of the semantic search and vector search stuff was working, and mainly I just wanted to be able to have like a little search engine that could do fuzzy search, so I couldn't remember if the document was like strategy or plan or whatever. And then the libraries, even a few years, 3, 4, 5 years ago, like started to get pretty good, and I made just a toy search engine that indexed all of my documents, and I'm like, oh my god, like this thing like returns results faster than I can type, and like it is not that hard to build something that gets way better results than like keyword search, or just like it's like unbelievable what these things can do. And then that was like one of the inputs. It wasn't the only one. In like I'm like, oh man, a billion people are gonna have something like this someday, but like right now 0 people have this. So big opportunity for Dropbox. We went and bought a company called Command E shortly thereafter, and then we've been investing in all the scaffolding here for the last few years, frankly, to really do this properly. But to me, I think if you're a tech entrepreneur, I think it's really hard to do your job if you don't understand the technology. And then there's so much like noise in AI and hype, and a lot of it is like well deserved. Like it is really transformative. Like this is the big one in our lifetimes in terms of like cycles of computing. But you have to get the time. You can't just be right about what the end state is going to be. You also have to be right about the timing. So is it? A lot of things are either if you're too early or you're too late, like they're both equal to being wrong. And so the way that it's always been like a very helpful kind of side channel for me to like, and I just enjoy it, like just keep coding and like go down and like really understand the algorithms deeply and develop like a much stronger intuition going down to like the, GPU and tensor and CUDA core and CUDA kernel debugging, like that level. Primarily because I think I like enjoy that stuff, but secondarily because it really informs for me like where we should be placing our bets.
Yeah. I feel like Dropbox. You've been CEO of this company for 18 years. The way you're talking about it here in terms of driving forward the product, what you're learning, it feels like I'm talking to a founder in the current YC batch that's hacking on this stuff, that's pushing CUDA. And I wanted to ask you more of like kind of a personal question as a CEO, how you've approached reinventing the company and yourself. There's very few people that have like had this kind of journey. A lot of CEOs, they go public and then they leave and they go live on their yacht or whatever. You're debugging CUDA. A bit of a different beast. It's very inspiring to me. I'm curious if like throughout this process, what's changed about you? How have you evolved yourself?
Yeah. Well, first. It certainly hasn't been a straight line. Like we've had a lot of like really exciting good things happen. I think we've had a bunch of periods of like stagnation, frankly, a bunch of things that, I think scaling a company and being a first-time founder is hard for everyone. Like no one's born knowing how to do this stuff. But to me, well, first I think like, how do you navigate that is like an important first question. The way I've always thought about it is like, you have to like keep your personal growth curve ahead of the company's growth curve, because as like a founder and CEO, your job is always, especially in the early days, like it's your job is changing every like 6 or 12 months. Just no one tells you that, and and the content of your job is changing a lot in ways that are kind of obvious. Like in 2007, Arash and I would just literally be coding because there was nothing else to do. Maybe talking to prospective customers, but then, then you raise money and you hire engineers, and then you need to have users, so you learn about marketing, and then you need a business model, and you need to charge people, and So like your plate, the circle keeps expanding every day, of where you have to do everything you were doing yesterday even better, while also taking on, spinning a bunch of new plates. And so the most useful things for me were like one, reading. Because like all these problems are like new to me, but they're like not new to the industry or new to business or new to technology. And so like figuring out your unknown unknowns is an important first step in reading. Like the median business book is not very good, but the good ones are really great. So things like classics like High Output Management from Andy Grove, or The Effective Executive by Andy Drucker, or Peter Drucker. And I could give a reading list later, but that really, and that doesn't make you a great CEO in and of itself any more than reading a book about guitar or something will make you a good guitar player. Like you have to practice it, but like it gives you sort of the mental scaffolding that was like really important. And then like just being in communities, like the Bay Area or like here, where you learn. I found it like I would learn a lot from like my YC batchmates, all going through the same thing at the same time. Then you learn like a different set of things from people who are like a year or two ahead. Then you learn a different set of things from people who are like 5 years ahead. And then you learn a very different set of things from people who are like 10, 20 years ahead. And then, but at every step I'd be like, all right, well, in a year from now, 2 years from now, 5 years from now, like what will I wish I had been learning today? And some things you can learn pretty quickly, like how to raise a venture round. It's technical, it's tricky, but it's like not that conceptually complicated. But then other things like how do you be a great leader? How do you inspire people? How do you get good at public speaking? Like whatever. Like
how do you debug CUDA?
How do you debug CUDA kernels? AI actually can help with that. But these other things take a lot longer to learn. And so I think like taking charge of your own learning is super important. But I think the other question is like, well, why and how keep doing this for like 18 years? I think for me, there was the early phases were kind of just like big numbers get bigger. It was sort of a continuation of college, like and the road to college. Like as a kid, your life is very like checkbox oriented. If you want to get into this good school, like, well, if you want to get into this school, you have to like first get these test scores and do all these extracurriculars and blah blah blah, and then graduating from college, then starting a company is actually kind of a continuation of a lot of that. You're like, well, okay, well, I need an idea, I need a co-founder, okay, I need a prototype, I want to get into YC, okay, now I want to get Sequoia, now we need this valuation, that valuation. And so you actually don't have to do that much or it's easier to not have to do that much thinking about, why you're doing what you're doing. And at some point, you sort of get above, a certain level, and you're like, wait, I've gotten all the merit badges I need. This company's like way more successful than I ever thought it could be. It's also it was a lot harder in the middle innings than I would have expected, because suddenly, your reward for making it through these, for checking those boxes is like harder opponents and like more to lose. And so for me, I had to like really reconnect to like a sense of purpose. Both for the company and for me personally. So one thing was like, we never established a formal mission for Dropbox, but you could have sort of backed it. I don't know, keep your files in sync or something. But at some point, we're like, we did it. Like the files are in sync. Like now what? And a couple things like really stood out. Like new frustrations emerged. I mean, first is like the cognitive experience at work is like really screwed up. Like I'm like, all right, I'm in like meetings all day. All right, here's like big CEO life is like. I'm in meetings all day. I'm in emails all night. I sleep. I wake up and I repeat. I'm like, is this it? First world problem. But I'm like, and then what was that in and of itself wasn't the problem. The problem is that my brain just felt like it was stuck in first gear. I was just like reacting to stuff and just didn't really. I couldn't remember the last time I had done something creative and I was like, well, if I'm busy and the company's succeeding, then that's fine. Like the company's winning. But I'm like, wait, everybody seems to be losing here. Like I'm like not having a good time. Company's not benefiting. The company's not winning as a result. And there's this sort of feeling of being like simultaneously overworked but underutilized, and just like my brain was just scrambled by the digital environment I'm in, because it was just like so noisy and overloading. And today that's like 100 times worse. So there's a part of like a cognitive part for me personally, but then also just like running this big organization. I'm just like, I can't. I'm like, we're skimming off the top in terms of talent, but like as we get bigger, the company, I can't help but see that the company just seems to be getting like bigger and dumber and slower as we scale. And I'm like, what's up with that? And so those two things became like big rabbit holes that I went down that I'm still like working on today. Like maybe these are like because part of me was like, all right, should I just like, I probably wasn't going to retire, but I'm like, I should maybe do the flying cars or space or the tech bro ascendancy. But then when I talked to people that who were doing those things, like I talked to an engineering director from SpaceX, and I remember asking him, like, because I was feeling a little like, I wasn't bored at Dropbox, but I was like kind of like burned out a little bit. And I was asking him like, oh my God, you guys are like actually going to Mars. Like this is so cool. Like how do you guys work together? What tools you use? He's like, I don't think I understand. What do you mean? And I'm like, well, what's it going to take to put someone on Mars? And the answer was basically a lot of emails and a lot of files. And I was just like, holy shit! Like, we can and we think about technology as like this force multiplier, like this enabler, which it is. But if you sort of look at it from the other perspective, like technology is also the limiting factor. Like we can only be as good as like our tools and our, technology. And like nobody's, there were a lot of, we had solved this problem around file syncing, and other people, or and bringing people into the cloud, and other companies did that too. But I'm like, now what? I'm like, man, this problem of like the work environment being like totally distracting and overwhelming, and organizations scaling dysfunctionally, like that seems to be like the moonshot that every other moonshot depends on. And so we shift, like that's what we established as our company's mission, is to design a more enlightened way of working, because the way we're working is just like not sustainable or scalable. From little problems to big problems, but even just something as basic as like getting people the information they need at work, like turns out is a much bigger problem in 2025, despite having what we would have called AGI 10 years ago. That is still like an enormous problem. And so, what keeps me motivated is being able to paint on a bigger canvas. Like I never get tired of like looking over someone's shoulder in a Starbucks and seeing if they have a little Dropbox logo on their laptop. And with Dash and with AI, to like be able to do things with a much bigger platform and just like solve kind of like solve problems for like almost like planetary scale, like never gets old. So I think that's what's like the best thing about our industry.
It sounds like you and Dropbox are kind of in this new chapter, like almost like doubling down on the original mission in the era of AI. You do a lot of interviews. A lot of people ask you questions about starting companies or, the Dropbox product. What do you think people don't ask you enough, or the topic that hasn't really been covered that you wish someone would ask you in an interview?
Well, I don't know if it's about me, but I think we're certainly in a time where like, with AI, where like the sort of apparent success of the companies is like quite divorced from the fundamentals of the company, to put it politely. And we're like sort of running this experiment of like how far can you scale a company that is like losing $10 for every dollar of revenue that it gets from its customers, and like at some point like gravity does kick in. And so I think a question that people should be asking is like, do fundamentals matter, or why do they matter, or like how should I think about that when the world seems kind of unhinged and like totally frothy? And I think I think first, like one thing that's helpful, like if you want to know what's going to happen in the future, like looking to the past and like reading the history of these like of every era of computing is like super helpful, because I think it doesn't mean that like history doesn't repeat, it sort of rhymes. There's like patterns that you can identify, and so I think like understanding how these phases of like hype and disappointment, and then the technology adoption life cycles, things like that, is super helpful to sort of demystify what's going on. And then second, I think it is useful to like learn the skill of like being able to evaluate your business the way that like that Warren Buffett would look at your business, and like and understand why that's important and how companies are valued. And I think even in my journey, like it was like way easy. It was sort of, I had the bizarre experience of like being able to raise money at a $10 billion valuation without having any idea what that meant, and seeing like Dropbox being more valuable than all these like blue chip like household name kind of companies. And I mean, we were humbled not long afterwards, because like you had this, it's like hard to live up to those kinds of expectations. But I think it's like really worth understanding the history of tech, and just like understanding, being able to look at a business in a more fundamental way. And like, I mean, that often doesn't help when all your competitors are also doing these like unsustainable things. So it doesn't really necessarily give you the answer as far as what to do, but it can help with like not getting so overextended. And I think YC and Paul Graham have a good kind of maxim about the importance of being like default alive, and like not relying too much on the kindness of strangers to keep your company afloat. And I don't think it's like a binary thing, but I think making sure not to get yourself too overextended. Going off a ski jump can be fun. Going off at like 60 or 80 miles an hour can be fun. Going off a ski jump at like 500 miles an hour can cause you to vaporize. And so I think like I think people, it's like not clear how you introduce that back into the conversation here, but I think it's something that every entrepreneur should be thinking about.
I think it's a thing people are scared to talk about almost, because we don't want to know where that's going to end up. Yeah,
totally.
Drew, we'll let you go. This is all the time we have for you. Thank you so much for joining us here at ERC.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Thank you, Michael.
Thanks a lot.